Your fingers feel like ice as they grip the glass during this late dinner, a persistent vibration starting in your palm and traveling up to your elbow. It's not just tonight. You've felt this heaviness for months, a slow fog that settles in your chest, making you feel like a guest in your own home. You've tried the herbal teas and the expensive vitamins, but the confusion only grows sharper. This trembling isn't a sign of your body failing. It's a silent alarm warning you about the danger sitting right across the table. In the next few minutes, you'll understand what is truly happening and why you cannot take another sip. My name is Arthur Harrison Vance, a 67-year-old man who built a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire starting from a single dusty hardware store in Queens. Every morning at precisely 5 o'clock, I read the physical newspapers in my mahogany library, the scent of fresh ink grounding me in a world I used to control. My retirement is quiet, marked by games of chess against myself and Sunday visits to St. Jude's Cemetery. That is where Eleanor stays now. She left me 4 years ago, taken by a sudden pulmonary embolism that left our house feeling cavernous. I still carry her gold wedding ring in my vest pocket, frequently rubbing the smooth metal between my thumb and forefinger for comfort. My son Julian, now 38, was supposed to be my greatest legacy, standing alongside his wife Clara and our sweet 8-year-old grandson, Toby. Tonight, we gathered at the Gilded Rose in Manhattan, a place that breathes old-world luxury and echoes with memories of better holidays. Before we proceed with this devastating account, I want to thank you for being here. Please comment below and tell me which city you are watching from right now. Also, note that some names and locations have been fictionalized for privacy and dramatic purposes. As I sat there watching Toby laugh, I believed my family was a fortress, never suspecting that the foundation had already been completely hollowed out by greed. As the main course arrived, Julian reached into his charcoal suit and placed a small, silver-capped crystal vial on the white linen. I recognized it instantly, the Tiffany heirloom I gifted him on his 21st birthday, now used for his sweetener. He moved it with a mechanical precision that seemed slightly out of sync with his usual relaxed demeanor. I watched a single spark of light hit the silver, reflecting the flickering candlelight of our booth. My mind cataloged it as a harmless habit of a healthy man, yet the way his knuckles whitened against the cap felt unnecessarily tense. I tried focusing on Toby's laughter, but my gaze kept drifting back to that tiny, shimmering object near my wine. When Julian opened the vial to sweeten his coffee, I noticed a faint, grayish residue clinging to the inner rim, a gritty texture that didn't match his usual white crystals. He caught me looking and snapped the lid shut, his expensive smile returning a fraction too late to mask a flicker of panic. He laughed, a hollow sound, making a joke about the humidity affecting the sugar. The math simply wouldn't add up. The humidity in the Gilded Rose was perfectly controlled at 45%. A cold, nameless dread began to settle in my chest, an alarm bell ringing beneath the festive music. I wasn't ready to call it betrayal, but the foundation of my trust was showing a hairline fracture. I didn't confront him at the table. Instead, I excused myself to the restroom, my heart a leaden weight against my ribs. I needed to see if my mind was finally failing, or if my son was truly a ghost in a charcoal suit. Returning home, I went straight to my library, locking the heavy mahogany door. I pulled the ledger for the Southridge project, dated October 12, 2025. My fingers shook as I traced the wire transfers. There was a disbursement of $800,000 to an offshore account I didn't recognize. The recipient was Veritas Holdings, a shell company registered in Panama. The paperwork bore a signature that looked like mine, but the slant was off by 3 degrees. The realization hit me like a physical blow. For the past 6 months, Julian had been gently suggesting I was becoming forgetful. He'd hide my car keys in the refrigerator or move my reading glasses to the greenhouse, then sigh with a performative pity when I couldn't find them. "It's okay, Dad," We'll get through this together, he'd whisper, his hand on my shoulder feeling like a cold snake. I had actually started believing him, even scheduling an appointment with a neurologist for next Tuesday at 2 p.m. But the silver violet dinner changed everything. It wasn't my memory that was failing. It was my son's morality that had completely rotted away from the inside. I checked the security logs for my private safe, the one hidden behind Eleanor's portrait. On November 14th at 3:15 a.m., the biometric scanner recorded an entry. I was asleep then, sedated by the herbal tea Clara insisted I drink every night before bed. The logs showed that the original deed to the Vance Plaza was removed for 47 minutes before being replaced. When I pulled the document now, I noticed a microscopic smear of blue ink on the seal that shouldn't be there. It was a forgery, a high-quality duplicate meant to replace the real asset. My own home had become a crime scene, and I was the unsuspecting victim living among the evidence. I couldn't do this alone. I needed a blade I could trust, someone who didn't care about the Vance name. I called Ryan Holloway, a 52-year-old retired NYPD detective who had handled security for Vance Holdings for over 15 years. Ryan arrived at 1:30 a.m., his face a map of weary experience. He didn't ask questions. He just opened his encrypted laptop and began scrubbing the digital footprint of Julian's personal accounts. We sat in the dim light of the library, the only sound being the ticking of the grandfather clock. Ryan looked at me, his eyes reflecting a deep, professional sorrow that told me the truth was going to be much worse than a simple theft. "Arthur, look at this," Ryan whispered, turning the screen toward me. He had bypassed the firewall of an underground gambling site called the Ivory Room. Julian hadn't just been stealing, he was hemorrhaging money. Over the last 3 years, he had accumulated a staggering debt of $4.2 million. The creditors weren't banks. They were sharks who didn't believe in late fees, only broken bones. The Southridge project hadn't just been mismanaged. It had been liquidated entirely to pay off a single weekend's loss in Macau back in February. My son wasn't just greedy. He was desperate, a cornered animal with a silver vial and a deadline that expired at midnight tonight. But the financial ruin was only the second layer. Ryan pulled up a series of encrypted emails between Julian and Elias Thorne, my personal attorney for 20 years. Elias wasn't just Julian's college friend. He was the architect of my downfall. The emails, dated as recently as yesterday at 4 p.m., detailed a plan to have me declared mentally incompetent by a hand-picked board of doctors. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were planning to bury me alive in a private psychiatric ward. The devil's breath powder in my wine wasn't meant to kill me. It was meant to make me a compliant puppet while I signed away my entire existence. The scale of the betrayal felt like a tectonic shift beneath my feet. It wasn't just my son. It was my trusted lawyer, and even Clara, the woman who took Eleanor's place at our Sunday dinners. They had been meeting at a townhouse on West 74th Street, plotting the precise moment to strike. Ryan found a recording of a phone call where Julian's voice sounded unrecognizable, cold, and filled with a terrifying hatred. "The old man is a relic," he had said, his words cutting deeper than any knife. "He thinks he's protecting us, but he's just standing in the way of what's rightfully mine." I realized then that my life was truly over. I reached into my vest pocket and gripped Eleanor's wedding ring, the cold gold offering no warmth tonight. I thought back to Julian's 10th birthday, the one I missed because I was closing the deal on the Queen's Warehouse. I had bought his love with a mountain of toys, thinking that providing for his future was the same as being present in his past. I had funded his education, his cars, and his lifestyle, never realizing I was just sharpening the teeth of the wolf that would eventually turn on me. I spent 40 years building walls to keep the world out, never realizing that the greatest threat was the boy I had tucked into bed. As Ryan closed his laptop, he handed me a small, clear bag containing a sample of the gray powder he'd found in Julian's car earlier tonight. It was scopolamine, a drug that would strip me of my will and leave me a shell of a man. The notary was already waiting in the restaurant lobby, the documents ready for a signature I wouldn't remember giving. I looked at the clock. It was nearly time for the toast. My son thinks I am his victim, but he has no idea that the predator has finally woken up. Before I reveal my next move, I need to know. If you were me, would you call the police now, or wait for revenge? Type, police, or revenge. Ryan's fingers flew across the keyboard as a new folder appeared on the screen, labeled Health Assessments. My breath hitched when I saw my own name on documents I had never signed, including a falsified MRI report from 3 months ago. They hadn't just been gaslighting me with misplaced keys. They had been building a comprehensive legal fortress to prove I was suffering from early-onset Alzheimer's. Every time I felt confused lately, it wasn't my age. It was a calculated psychological operation, orchestrated by my own flesh and blood. The betrayal wasn't a sudden impulse. It was a slow, methodical assassination of my character and my sanity that had been meticulously planned since last spring. The shadow of the conspiracy stretched even further into the corners of my life I considered sacred. Ryan bypassed an encrypted server and found a series of wire transfers to Dr. Marcus Sterling, my primary physician for over a decade. The consultation fees were paid by the same Panamanian shell company, Veritas Holdings, totaling nearly $500,000. Sterling wasn't just treating my blood pressure. He was the one providing the medical legitimacy for my forced institutionalization. The man who sat at my bedside after Eleanor passed was the same man now signing my death warrant for a paycheck. I realized then that my entire support system had been completely subverted. My daughter-in-law, Clara, the woman I welcomed into our family with open arms, was the true architect of the financial liquidation. Ryan uncovered a hidden spreadsheet on her personal laptop that detailed the sale of every single one of my private assets, from the vintage car collection to Eleanor's jewelry. She hadn't just been waiting for Julian to inherit. She had already contacted auction houses in London and Zurich to move the items the moment I was unavailable. Her soft smiles and polite inquiries about my health were nothing more than a predator measuring the weight of its prey. The greed in that house was a suffocating, living entity that I had blindly nourished. The tension reached a breaking point when I received a text from Julian while I was still with Ryan. "Checking in on you, Dad. You seemed a bit off at dinner. See you at home at 3 a.m. He wasn't just checking in. He was tracking my location. Ryan realized Julian had installed a GPS beacon on my car and was monitoring our session in real time. The risk shifted from legal to lethal in that second. Julian moved the Plan B extraction up by 4 hours, hiring a private security firm called Blackwood Tactical to intercept me before I could ever return to the estate or call the authorities. I had to maintain a facade of ignorance while Ryan worked frantically to erase our digital tracks. Every notification on my phone felt like a gunshot. The fear of Julian walking through the library door at any moment clawing at my throat. We found a legal petition to have Julian appointed as Toby's sole guardian, coupled with a plan to send the boy to a restrictive boarding school in the Swiss Alps. Julian didn't want the responsibility of being a father. He only wanted Toby as a bargaining chip for the remaining trusts. My son was willing to sacrifice his own child's happiness to fuel his desperate, gambling-addicted ego. Julian's desperation was fueled by the Vanev Syndicate, a gambling ring that was now calling his phone every 10 minutes. Ryan intercepted a message where the enforcer, known as the architect, gave Julian an ultimatum. They didn't want the $4 million anymore. They wanted the deed to Vance Plaza by midnight, or they would clear the ledger by removing the obstacle, me. Julian's replies were frantic, promising that I was already under control and would be signing the documents within the hour. The pressure on Julian was mounting, making him more volatile and dangerous than I had ever imagined. I was now caught between my son and his executioners. As the clock ticked toward 2 a.m., Ryan uncovered a final horrific contingency plan labeled estate closure. It was a detailed guide on how to stage a fatal accident in my library, using an oxygen tank and a faulty heater. If the insanity route faced any legal resistance from my board of directors, Julian was prepared to end my life entirely. He had even drafted a heartfelt eulogy, already saved as a draft in his email, praising the tragic but brilliant man he called father. Seeing those words, written in the past tense while I was still breathing, felt like a cold hand tightening around my throat. The emotional weight of the betrayal finally broke through my professional exterior as Ryan showed me the last piece of evidence. Julian had already accepted a down payment for the demolition of Eleanor's memorial rose garden. A luxury condominium developer was scheduled to break ground on that sacred soil in less than 30 days. To Julian, my memories of Eleanor were just another asset to be liquidated and paved over for profit. The garden where I spent every Sunday morning talking to my late wife was being sold for pennies on the dollar. The monster I raised didn't just want my future. He was actively erasing my entire past. I stood up from the mahogany desk, the clear bag of scopolamine weighing down my vest pocket like a leaden heart. The dinner at the Gilded Rose was no longer a family gathering. It was a battlefield where the lines had been drawn in blood and greed. Julian thinks he is the predator, but he has forgotten who taught him how to survive in a world of sharks. I looked at Eleanor's portrait one last time, promising her that our legacy would not end in a prison cell or a psychiatric ward. Warning, what I did next at that table is deeply disturbing. If you have a weak heart, please leave this video now. The heavy silence of the restaurant suddenly felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest as I watched Julian take that final arrogant gulp of the 1982 Petrus. My hands, normally as steady as the steel beams of my skyscrapers, began a rhythmic, uncontrollable trembling beneath the white linen tablecloth. I saw his pupils dilate into obsidian voids, his expensive charcoal suit suddenly appearing like a premature shroud draped over a dying man. The oily sheen on the wine wasn't just a chemical residue. It was the literal reflection of a 40-year lie finally coming to light. My lungs burned with every shallow breath, the air in the Gilded Rose turning into freezing, crystalline oxygen. "You always hated this vintage, didn't you, Julian?" I whispered, my voice cracking like dry parchment. The real truth shattered my heart. Eleanor didn't die of a random embolism 4 years ago. She died because Julian had been practicing his medical interventions on her first. But the ultimate irony was sitting in my breast pocket, a signed, notarized deed transferring 51% of Vance Holdings to Julian as a surprise Christmas gift. I was literally handing him the keys to the kingdom at the very moment he chose to poison me for them. He hadn't just killed his mother. He had committed a slow, unnecessary suicide of his own future for a prize I was already giving him. My mind raced back to Julian's 10th birthday, that rainy afternoon I spent in a boardroom instead of at his party. I had always carried that guilt like a stone, believing my absence had created his greed. But now I saw the terrifying reality. He hadn't cried because I wasn't there. He had laughed because he realized my absence gave him the freedom to start stealing from my private accounts even then. Every "I love you, Dad," and every "we'll get through this" was a meticulously sharpened blade he had been plunging into my back for 3 decades. The love I thought I was protecting was merely a convenient camouflage for a predator I had personally financed. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold, unforgiving weight of Eleanor's gold wedding ring, finally understanding that justice was the only language my son would ever speak. I signaled to Ryan and the officers waiting in the shadows, my decision as final and absolute as a closing bell on the stock exchange. Julian's head hit the table with a dull, sickening thud, the silver-capped vial rolling toward me like a spent bullet casing from a forgotten war. Before I stand up to end this legacy of blood and betrayal, I need to know who is still standing here with me. Are you watching this right now? Type "present" in the comments if you are ready for the confrontation. I didn't look at the doors, but I knew Ryan and 4 plainclothes officers from the Manhattan North Precinct were closing the perimeter of the booth. Julian's breathing was becoming a wet, ragged rattle, his motor functions dissolving as the scopolamine he intended for me began its slow, chemical conquest of his nervous system. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded over the white linen, watching the expensive facade of the heir apparent crumble into a mask of neurological confusion. The restaurant's amber chandeliers cast long, flickering shadows that looked like bars across the table. Julian tried to reach for the silver-capped vial, but his fingers were useless, twitching against the wood like dying spiders. "What's happening to me, Dad?" Julian slurred, his eyes wide with a terrifying primal panic that finally stripped away the charcoal suit's arrogance. I leaned forward, my voice a cold, surgical instrument that cut through the soft jazz playing in the background. I didn't whisper. I spoke with the resonant authority of a man who had commanded boardrooms for 40 years. I laid the bank statements and the falsified medical reports on the table, the black ink stark against the white tablecloth. People at the neighboring tables began to turn, their conversations dying as they realized the Vance family patriarch was performing a public autopsy on his own son's morality. The trap was finally closing. Julian tried to laugh, a sickening, wet sound, and attempted to gaslight me one last time by claiming I was the one experiencing a hallucination. "You're confused, Arthur. The dementia is finally winning," he screamed, his voice cracking and drawing the attention of every diner in the Gilded Rose. But as the drug tightened its grip, his manipulation turned into a desperate, foaming confession of every sin he had committed since Eleanor passed. He admitted to the $4.2 million gambling debt to the Vanev syndicate and the systematic liquidation of the South Ridge project. The truth poured out of him like bile, fueled by a lifetime of hidden resentment and unchecked greed. He wasn't just confessing to theft. He was bragging about the medical interventions he performed on his mother, Eleanor, to accelerate her final pulmonary embolism. "She was always in the way, just like you," he hissed, his head lolling as the scopolamine stripped away his last shred of human decency. He confessed to selling her Memorial Rose Garden to a luxury developer and bribing Dr. Sterling with $500,000 from the Panamanian Shell Company. Every word was a hammer blow to my soul, but I remained an immovable statue of justice. The entire restaurant stood in a paralyzed silence, witnessing a son desecrate his mother's memory for the price of a cold penthouse. Detective Ryan Halloway stepped from the shadows, his badge glinting under the Manhattan lights as he signaled the uniformed officers to move in. They didn't offer the dignity of a private exit. They read Julian his Miranda rights right there among the half-eaten entrees and the spilled patris. The clink of the steel handcuffs was the most honest sound I had heard in 20 years, a definitive punctuation mark on a legacy of blood. Clara was intercepted in the lobby, her designer bag containing the remaining doses of the gray powder and the forged power of attorney documents. The public exposure was absolute. The Vance name shattered in front of the very elite Julian craved. The legal consequences followed with a cold, administrative precision that would eventually see Julian sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security facility for attempted murder and elder abuse. Clara received 12 years for conspiracy, and Dr. Sterling's medical license was revoked before he was even processed at the station. Over $8 million in embezzled assets were frozen, and the deed to Vance Plaza was returned to the estate by a court order issued the following morning. As they wheeled Julian out on a gurney, I caught my reflection in the dark window, a man who had saved his empire but lost his heart. Outside, the first snow began to fall, burying the city in silent white. It is now June 15th, 2026, and the morning sun warms the Eleanor Vance Memorial Garden, which stands untouched by the luxury developers who once circled it like vultures. I spent the last 6 months dismantling the empire I built, redirecting the billions into the Vance Eleanor Foundation, a scholarship fund for students who understand that character is the only currency that never devalues. My grandson, Toby, sits beside me, his laughter the only music I need as we study the chessboard between us. I no longer carry Eleanor's wedding ring. I placed it into her headstone. The house is quieter now, but the air feels clean, and the shadows have finally retreated. I am speaking directly to you now because my story isn't just about a poisoned vintage. It is about the legacy of blood we all leave behind. You must look across your own table tonight and ask if the love you see is genuine, or merely a mask for calculated greed. Scripture warns that the love of money is the root of all evil, and I learned that through my own son. Protect your spirit, keep your circles small, and never mistake providing for parenting. If this account moved you, please comment "Justice," share this video, and subscribe to our family. Note that some names were changed for privacy. Remember, once the wine is poured, there is no going back.